Are electric cars worse than petrol cars? More and more people decide to switch to electric cars. Currently, there are about 2 million electric cars on the streets. This number is expected to reach 125 million by 2030. But are electric cars really more environmental friendly than petrol cars? To answer this question, there are a couple of things we need to put in consideration. Let's start with the most obvious one. On one hand, we have the petrol cars. The CO2 emission is directly and easy to measure. If we assume an average consumption of 5 liters per 100 km, we can calculate a CO2 emission of 120 grams per kilometer for petrol cars and about 132 grams for diesel cars. So how does it look on the other side? How much CO2 is produced by electric cars? Well, on the first side, it seems to be none. There is no direct emission, no exhaust pipe, so therefore it must be zero, right? Well, not exactly. Let's take a step backward. An electric car needs energy, and this energy comes in form from electricity from power plants. There are several ways of generating electric energy. Most common are coal-fired power plants, nuclear power plants, and renewable energy, like hydroelectric plants, solar power, and wind turbines. In most countries you're getting an electricity mix of all of those. The biggest amount of CO2 emission is coming from coal-fired power plants. This brings the CO2 level up to 340 grams per kilowatt hour on European Union average. Taking this in consideration, our electric car's CO2 emission rises up to 43 grams per kilometer, assuming an average use of 12.7 kilowatt hours per 100 km. Does this mean an electric car is more environmental friendly than a petrol car? Well, to be fair, we need to talk about the full chain. So what about the battery itself? We have primary materials which needs to get out of the ground, mainly by heavy machines. There are gigantic factories for assembling the components and shipping the batteries all over the world. This means there are about 175 kilos of CO2 produced for each kilowatt hours of a battery. So how does that add to our CO2 calculation? Well, not as much as you might think it would. On an average battery capacity of 32 kilowatt hours and the pessimistic calculation of 250,000 kilometers driven before the life of the battery ends, the CO2 level would rise to about 65.4 grams per kilometer. So we could stop here and say we have the answer. But in order to have a correct calculation, we must consider the chain of the petrol car as well. In order to get the fuel into your car, there's a long process behind. Beginning with the finding of the oil, test drilling, pumping the oil to the surface, transporting the oil in super tankers or big pipes around the planet to factories, where the oil needs to be processed and again filled into trucks and transported to gas stations where it needs to be pumped in your car. This adds a minimum of 30 grams CO2 per kilometer for petrol and 31 grams CO2 per kilometer for diesel. So is an electric car more environmentally friendly than a petrol car? Yes, by far. And in this video, we didn't talk about the fine particulate air pollution, the oil catastrophes like sinking supertankers and accidents with offshore platforms. Neither did we talk about the second and third life cycle of a car battery, the constant development of renewable energy and the increasing efficiency of the technology, which, if put into consideration, would show an even bigger gap between these two car types in favor for the electric car. This is the future, and the greatest chance of a cleaner and healthier environment for all of us. So, instead of fighting against the change, let's be part of it. Thank you for watching, and if you're more interested in this topic, check out the links in the description below.